A beautiful young woman, shy and soft-spoken, catches the eye of a real-life prince. They marry in a lavish ceremony, watched by hundreds of millions around the world, and she slips into a gleaming carriage to the roar of adoring crowds. It's like a page ripped from the sweetest romantic fable, except this particular story has a twist so heartbreaking it still haunts us decades later. This is the saga of Diana Spencer, eventually Princess of Wales, whose life began under quiet pressure, became a whirlwind of court intrigue, and ended in a collision of tragedy and controversy unlike anything the modern world had seen. Diana Spencer came into the world on July 1, 1961, arriving in a family still shaken from a profound loss. Her parents, John and Frances Spencer, had desperately wanted a son to secure the Spencer lineage. They had already experienced the heartache of losing an infant boy just 10 hours after his birth. When Diana was born, the tension wasn't magically resolved. If anything, it grew heavier. She was a daughter, not the male heir they needed. Although her parents doted on her at times, an undercurrent of disappointment ran through the household. That atmosphere would come to define Diana's earliest experiences of family life. 3 years after Diana's birth, her parents finally welcomed a surviving son, Charles. You'd think this arrival would lighten the mood in their home, but the cracks were already there. Diana watched her father and mother clash behind closed doors. Sometimes it was bitter words. Sometimes, she would later claim, it was outright physical abuse. Still a child, Diana found herself helpless to stop the downward spiral of her parents' relationship. When the marriage imploded at last, Frances left John Spencer for another man. A fierce custody battle followed, so public and so vicious that it left emotional bruises on everyone involved. Diana was 7 when the judge awarded primary custody to her father. In a devastating twist, Diana's own grandmother sided with John Spencer, convinced that taking the children away from Frances was for the best. Diana would later recall how her mother visited only on weekends, how each Sunday night ended in tears when her mother had to say goodbye. It's a heartbreaking image, a little girl caught in a rift too enormous for her young mind to comprehend. In time, her elder sisters left for boarding school. Diana remained behind with her younger brother Charles, both of them effectively raised by nannies and staff, making the best of a lonely situation. Although she had access to wealth and aristocratic privilege, she grew up on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, which belonged to the Queen. Diana didn't live the carefree existence one might imagine. She dreaded the moments when the royals came around for visits, even though she occasionally played with Princes Andrew and Edward, both of whom were close in age. It was an early sign that the formalities of royal life could leave her feeling uneasy, as though she were already preparing for a role she hadn't agreed to audition for. When Diana was still a teenager, her father, John Spencer, remarried, taking as his new wife Reine, Countess of Dartmouth. Diana and her siblings disliked Reine so intensely that they called her Acid Reine. Tensions ran hot. At one event, Diana even pushed Reine down the stairs in a rage. Resentment flared further when her father collapsed from a brain hemorrhage, and Reine restricted the children's visits to see him in the hospital. Every year, every household shift, seemed to reinforce Diana's sense that adult life could be cruel and unpredictable. School was hardly a refuge. Whereas her elder sisters excelled academically, Diana struggled. She flunked her O-level exams twice. At 16, she dropped out of school. Her parents refused to let her move to London independently until she was 18, so she took a nanny job in Hampshire to bridge the gap. Once she came of age, she moved to London, shared an apartment with several girlfriends, and pieced together a life from a string of low-paying jobs, nannying, teaching dance, cleaning for her sister's friends. By all accounts, she was cheerful, if a little shy, and absolutely relished the relative freedom of doing what she pleased. No domineering stepmother hovered over her, no father stressed about upholding the family name. Meanwhile, fate was quietly stirring a different path for Diana. Her family home at Althorpe attracted all kinds of aristocratic visitors, including Sarah Spencer, Diana's older sister, and a certain prince named Charles, who occasionally dropped by. Diana had known Prince Charles in passing because of the family's lease at Sandringham, and she found it funny that her sister Sarah had a crush on him. Diana herself supposedly thought he seemed moody, even sad. Yet life can be ironic.
Soon enough, Sarah's romance with Charles fizzled out, and the next time Diana bumped into him, sparks of another kind started to fly. Their mutual attraction happened rather abruptly. At a weekend gathering, she commented to him about the funeral of Lord Mountbatten, his beloved great-uncle. She remarked that he looked forlorn and in need of companionship. He latched onto that compassion like a lifeline, practically leaping at her. He soon invited her to Balmoral, the royal family's estate in Scotland, for another weekend. For Diana, who was naive in the world of dating, she had never really had a boyfriend. This felt overwhelming, but also thrilling. The entire dynamic was rushed. She'd known him socially, but hardly intimately, and suddenly he was calling her apartment, weaving grand gestures of affection, telling her how much he missed her. At 19, she was swept away by the idea of romance, oblivious to the complexities that lurked in Charles's life, specifically his deep bond with Camilla Parker Bowles. In time, Diana grew unsettled. Even before the engagement became public, she caught ominous clues about Charles's relationship with Camilla, including pet names like Fred and Gladys, and a suspiciously engraved bracelet he'd had made for Camilla. Despite these glaring red flags, Diana felt trapped by circumstance. When Charles proposed, in a strangely emotionless moment, she said yes, even as he muttered the chilling line, "I love you so much, whatever love means." In her own words, she had only seen Charles about 13 times before their official engagement. She was a teenager facing a role that would define the rest of her life, future Queen of England. Anxiety about the press enveloped her. The paparazzi staked out her apartment. They followed her to her nursery school job, constantly yelling her name, snapping photos that landed on the front pages of tabloids. She had no protection from the palace. The courtiers more or less shrugged and told her she was on her own. It was a rude awakening for a young woman who previously had trouble just paying her phone bills. When the engagement was announced, the media frenzy escalated to near hysterical levels. Still, Diana tried to hold it together. She borrowed friendly shoulders to lean on, even Camilla's, ironically, who gave her advice about managing Charles's moods. But the charade couldn't last. She overheard him telling Camilla on a phone call that he would always love her. Diana was devastated. She turned to her sisters, confessing that she wanted to call off the wedding. Their reply was ruthless. "Your face is on the tea towels. It's too late to chicken out now." On July 29, 1981, Diana walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, 750 million viewers watching worldwide. She wore an extravagant, puff-sleeved dress, 25-foot train trailing behind, as the orchestra played regal processional music. The fairy tale moment was set, yet behind the scenes, a storm brewed. Diana accidentally mixed up Charles's names during the vows, calling him Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip. She also refused to say she would obey him, a modern twist that scandalized traditionalists. Through it all, she felt a rush of genuine love for him. Even though Camilla was sitting in one of the pews, the occasion blinded Diana with romantic hope, if only for that day. The honeymoon that followed was rocky. Charles was more interested in reading the philosophical works he'd brought along than in bonding with his young wife. Their schedule left them little privacy anyway. Worse, Diana's bulimia, which she'd first developed under intense stress before the wedding, flared again. She realized something was off in her marriage, but she didn't know how to fix it. Prince Charles seemed distant. The constant presence of staff and paparazzi left her no breathing room. Back in Britain, the monarchy tried to integrate Diana into the system. She performed her new princess duties with an engaging sincerity, visiting schools, greeting well-wishers, always mindful of her posture and smile. But behind closed doors, her mental health deteriorated further. She became pregnant with Prince William, and at around the same time, she suffered from such a deep depression that she once flung herself down a staircase at Sandringham, desperate for Charles's attention. The Queen was horrified to witness it. Charles, however, brushed Diana off, accusing her of dramatics. She was left feeling worthless, unloved, and convinced that everyone around her thought she was simply crying wolf. In June 1982, Diana gave birth to Prince William. She adored her baby boy. For a while, motherhood brought brief moments of joy. Yet postpartum depression soon gripped her. She fought constantly with Charles, who expected her to behave like a polished consort, not an emotional young mother struggling to find her place. The following years blurred into a downward spiral of bulimia, public engagements, palace feuds, and the ever-present shadow of Camilla. Diana felt lonely, even within the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. She would repeatedly beg for rest, for understanding, only to be told she needed to keep up appearances. She sought help from psychiatrists, but they often prescribed medication she didn't want. She believed genuine compassion and a break from her punishing schedule would serve her better. By 1984, she was pregnant again, this time with Prince Harry. Her relationship with Charles was briefly warmer in the late stages of the pregnancy. That fleeting peace vanished when Harry was born, and Charles reportedly voiced his disappointment that the baby wasn't a girl. The heartbreak of failing to meet his expectations of a perfect heir and spare scenario weighed on Diana. She suffered quietly, though the press had no clue how dire her mental state was. She sometimes cut herself during confrontations with Charles, or locked herself in bathrooms to purge her meals. Far from offering solace, the palace labeled her bulimia a primary cause of Charles's unhappiness, as though her illness were solely to blame for the deteriorating marriage. Eventually, she discovered that Charles's romance with Camilla had reignited. In a dark mirror image of his betrayal, Diana found emotional refuge in extramarital affairs of her own. Her most publicized liaison was with James Hewitt, an army captain who taught her horseback riding. But rumors persisted about others, including a feeling that her security detail was worried she was too close to her bodyguard, Barry Mannicky. One day, Mannicky was transferred out of her service for inappropriate behavior. Soon after, he died in a road accident, an event that left Diana convinced, at times, that the palace might have had him killed to break off their bond. Whether her suspicions were valid or not, they show how paranoid and isolated she felt in the halls of royal power. In 1989, while attending a birthday party for Camilla's sister, Diana finally confronted the other woman in a moment of raw bravery. Typically, she avoided Camilla in social situations, but that night, fueled by a new sense of self-worth, she cornered Camilla and told her that she knew about the affair, that she felt humiliated, and that she deserved better. For Diana, it was a turning point. She refused to remain a silent, meek participant in her own unhappiness. She continued to publicly smile for the cameras, all while living a personal nightmare. Meanwhile, the British public began to see glimpses of the people's princess that would become Diana's enduring legacy. She threw herself into charitable work, gravitating to causes other royals avoided. Early in the AIDS crisis, Diana not only visited hospices, but also held the hands of patients and embraced them, publicly challenging the prevailing stigma. The press captured these images, and they became iconic, showing that a princess could be both compassionate and unafraid of controversy. People who felt invisible in society adored her. She was, at times, more loved than the monarchy itself, and that held its own dangers. The year 1992 was a watershed. The media circus, always fierce, zeroed in on a scandalous flood of revelations about Charles and Diana. First came the publication of Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story, which spilled all the private details: her bulimia, her suicide attempts, her despair over Charles and Camilla. Diana denied direct involvement, but it later emerged that she had secretly cooperated with Morton, wanting the public to know she was no pampered whiner, but rather a desperate prisoner of circumstance. The monarchy reeled. It was an unprecedented move by a royal to air so much dirty laundry in public. Then came Squidgygate, a leaked phone conversation from 1989 between Diana and an old friend, James Gilby. The press had a field day, implying an affair, especially since the tape included Gilby calling Diana by pet names like Darling and Squidgy. The monarchy was further humiliated, but the bombshells kept dropping. Camillagate soon followed. Tapes of Charles and Camilla, also from 1989, in which they indulged in toe-curling intimacy, Charles at one point saying he'd like to live in Camilla's trousers as a tampon. The public recoil was massive. Suddenly, the fairy tale marriage of 1981 stood revealed as a sham. Sympathy for Diana skyrocketed. By December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced the separation of Charles and Diana to the House of Commons. It was a monumental moment. Traditionally, the monarchy had always tried to keep internal strife hidden, but now it was out in the open. For Diana, this was liberation in name only. She was still living a half-life under the monarchy's shadow, continuing her official duties while stoking the wrath of courtiers who found her a wild card. In 1993, her father, John Spencer, passed away, and she felt another wave of grief. She and her brother Charles, now the 9th Earl Spencer, swiftly and ruthlessly pushed their disliked stepmother, Reine, out of the family home at Althorpe. Reports say Diana stood by as Charles's security guards shoved Reine's belongings into trash bags. It was a moment that revealed a colder, more vengeful side of Diana, shaped by years of bitterness toward acid Reine. During this same era, Diana began forging a deeper bond with the public. Freed from having to appear as Charles's dutiful wife, she poured her energy into her philanthropic work. She visited hospitals, hospices, and war-torn regions, famously walking through a partially cleared landmine field in Angola to highlight the horrors of leftover munitions. She also managed to find love again, or at least some measure of it. One such romance was with British-Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, often described by those close to her as the love of her life. She even considered marriage, but Khan was intensely private and dreaded the publicity that would hound them both. Ultimately, they broke up in the summer of 1997, though her friends later said she never got over him. Shortly after, she met Dodi Al-Fayed, son of the Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed. The relationship progressed rapidly. Paparazzi captured intimate photos of them kissing on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Those photos unleashed a renewed media obsession. Diana felt harassed to the point of near paranoia, reminiscent of her early days with Charles. However, she was also a savvy public figure by then, accustomed to weaving in and out of paparazzi traps, though she despised the intrusion on her private life. On August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi arrived in Paris, intending to spend a night there before moving on. They dined at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father, only to find paparazzi swarming outside, even more aggressive than usual. They changed their plans, trying to slip away unnoticed in a Mercedes with tinted windows, driven by the hotel's head of security, Henri Paul. who'd been drinking that night. Trevor Rees-Jones, a security guard for the Al-Fayed family, rode in the passenger seat. Diana and Dodi huddled in the back. As they sped into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel shortly after midnight, a group of photographers on motorcycles gave chase. Moments later, the car crashed catastrophically, ricocheting off pillars and walls until it stopped in a twisted wreck. Witnesses rushed to the scene. So did paparazzi, some of whom tried to take pictures. Henry Paul and Dodi Al-Fayed were killed instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones and Diana were still alive, at least initially. By the time first responders managed to extract Diana from the mangled vehicle, she was in cardiac arrest. They revived her at the scene, but the internal injuries were massive. Shortly before 4 a.m., doctors pronounced her dead at a Paris hospital. She was just 36 years old. The news broke like a thunderclap around the world. Millions woke up on August 31st to headlines announcing Diana's death. Across Britain, grief erupted in a way not seen in modern royal history. People gathered at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, laying 1,000,000 bouquets of flowers that formed a carpet of color. Some flower piles reached 5 feet in height. Grief mixed with outrage at the paparazzi, whose pursuit had, in many eyes, caused the crash. The royal family, sequestered at Balmoral, appeared perplexed and slow to respond. Anger at the monarchy escalated until the Queen was effectively compelled to address the nation, paying tribute to Diana as an exceptional and gifted human being. Diana's funeral took place on September 6, 1997. Millions lined the streets of London, and over 1 billion watched live on television. The most gut-wrenching sight was that of her 2 sons, Princes William and Harry, just 15 and 12, walking behind her coffin, along with Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Diana's brother, Charles Spencer. The rawness on the boys' faces, their quiet determination, moved a global audience to tears. Diana's brother delivered a eulogy condemning the relentless media attention that had hounded her and accusing the monarchy of failing to protect her uniqueness. His words ignited further debate about the role that the palace and the press each played in her demise. In the weeks and years after, investigations began. The official cause of death pointed to reckless driving by Henry Paul, who was found to have an elevated blood alcohol level plus prescription drugs in his system. The paparazzi's chase contributed to the high speed, yet that explanation did not satisfy everyone. Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, spent years arguing that Diana and Dodi had been murdered by the British Secret Service at the behest of the royal family, who allegedly couldn't tolerate the idea of Diana marrying a Muslim man. Though a coroner's inquest in 2008 dismissed these accusations, labeling the crash as an accident, conspiracy theories linger. Diana's own history of paranoia, she had told her lawyer that she believed someone was planning an accident for her, only fueled these suspicions. In the end, Diana remains an enigma. Was she a misunderstood rebel or a fragile princess undone by forces beyond her control? Perhaps both. She had her flaws, her grudges, her dramatic impulses. And yet, she also had a rare gift for connecting with the lonely and the outcast. Maybe that's the truest heartbreak of all. We lost her just as she was coming into her own, carving a life beyond palace gates, hoping for her own brand of happily ever after. And so, the next time the name Princess Diana surfaces, whether in a documentary, a news article about her sons, or a nostalgic conversation about that wedding dress, remember the full scope of who she was. A child caught in a broken home, a teen dazzled by a prince's title, a bride overlooked by her husband, a mother fiercely devoted to her boys, and ultimately, a compassionate figure whose empathy transcended royal protocol. Her heartbreak was real, but so was her ability to light up a room and make you feel seen. That's what makes her story endure, not just the tragedy of her untimely end, but the luminous spark she left behind in countless hearts.